Namaste and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show about India's foreign policy, India's major partnerships with the important countries around the world, and also key themes in India's engagement with the world. We take up a variety of subjects in this show, but today, viewers, I have something very interesting, a very special topic which is less understood and lesser known. This is India's development partnerships. India has a whole range of foreign assistance programs to fellow developing countries since independence. This is in fact the 75th year of India's development partnerships worth over $107 billion cumulatively. They don't call it foreign aid, they call it development partnerships. And today, to discuss the history of India's development partnerships as well as the emerging trends, I am very privileged to introduce you to none other than Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi. Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi is a leading economist in India, and he is the Director General of an important think tank, the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. He is also a member of the board of India's Central Bank, which is the Reserve Bank of India, and an expert on this whole topic of development partnerships and South-South cooperation. He is the author of this very important book called The Logic of Sharing. So, Professor Chaturvedi, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real privilege to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sreeram. I think I must congratulate you at the outset for this excellent series that is going on, and I understand today is the 13th episode, so it's going on very well. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So, Dr. Chaturvedi, we call it development partnership, and we generally avoid the terminology of richer countries, the Western countries, of a donor and a recipient, and we try to avoid this whole logic of charity and the downtrodden. But there is this sense of solidarity that has always driven the way India has approached development partnerships. So you have written and thought about our ethos and philosophy. So please tell our audiences what is the fundamental values behind why do we give to others? When people say we are ourselves a developing country, why do we share with others, and what is the the whole ideation behind this?
No, definitely, Sreeram, thanks a lot. I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of the ancient values that India always cherished, and in all our prayers, in all our societal connect, we believe in giving it to others, and we believe in giving it others without talking about it, and that's the beauty of our engagement and our engagement with our partner countries, our neighbors, our humanity as a whole, and the idea of welfare of humanity as a whole has been very much there in terms of our engagement. So that has been the practice, and India has been giving right from days of Emperor Ashoka. Even in during independence struggle, the collective will of the people was represented through the freedom struggle, and we sort of committed ourselves for sovereignty and freedom of countries in Africa, the African sovereignty, development, etc. But right from those years, Mahatma Gandhi talked about the issues of building society, and that, Sreeram, has been India's idea as well in terms of building the society, and not just for political freedom.
India has been committed to the idea that there is some kind of a kinship with fellow developing countries, the former colonized countries, and after independence, I mean last 75 years, we have been driven by the idea that we should help each other, and it's not a one-way traffic where we are donating something and they are receiving, right? So that's, and you have talked about this in your book Logic of Sharing also, that there is mutual benefit.
Yep.
So that seems like the underlying reason why we call it a partnership rather than some kind of a aid program. We don't use the term foreign aid, which is to distinguish ourselves from the north-south relationship historically, which have been on the basis of former exploited countries now receiving from their former colonial masters.
Absolutely right, Sreeram, and if you look at the whole process, three things are important here. First and foremost is this whole idea of India's engagement with the fellow developing countries, which is without any expectation. At RIS, we have taken up this major publication that I have got it for you, which is very much about the idea of India's engagement of last 75 years with fellow developing countries. And they, Sreeram, we've realized that over 75 years, India has given assistance basically in 5 modalities. So we have believed in people's skills, so human resources, so human capacity building. Then we have given grants, we have given concessional finance, we have given technology, and the 5th and last is the duty-free, quota-free access to Indian markets. So these 5 modalities, we have called that as development compact, India's development compact with others. And within these 5 modalities, India has given assistance of around $107 billion from 1947 till now. And this is sometimes, Sreeram, is bit amazing because we never talked about it.
Yeah.
This is the first publication in the country which talks about $107 billion. In fact, now we are going to revise it further to $156 billion in this period. But you hear so much about other countries, particularly China, and people comparing India and China. And
the volumes also deceptive, right?
No, exactly.
The cost at which we deliver, the components, the personnel, all those, the overheads, much lower.
That,
right?
Sreeram, is very much there. But even if you see the quantum, our calculations are showing that if India has given $156 billion from 1947 till 2022, Chinese assistance in this period through the 3 white papers that they have issued, they stand only at $58 billion. But the idea is that India never talks about it. We never get out and say what we are doing.
You mentioned that in the logic of sharing.
And that's the logic of sharing.
That there is a remarkable story of India that needs to be told, and we are trying to do this through Indian diplomacy. Viewers, I have a very interesting video statement, an exclusive one from Mr. Dammu Ravi for you. He is the Secretary Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs and is overall in charge of our development partnerships. So let's hear from Mr. Ravi and continue the discussion.
As Prime Minister of India has emphasized that India's development assistance will be determined by the recipient countries, which is why our programs and initiatives are widely appreciated and valued. In the Ministry of External Affairs, we are making every effort to improve our internal processes so that our delivery mechanism becomes efficient, transparent, and effectively reduce the timelines. We are looking at doing projects even with third countries under the trilateral cooperation initiatives so that the synergizing possibilities of technology, finances and skills can be expanded for optimum utilization and so also be able to take a large number of projects abroad. Further, we are looking at the possibility of supporting our entrepreneurs with concessional financing arrangements to help them to manufacture abroad in a wide variety of areas, especially in the healthcare, such as vaccines, pharmaceuticals, automobiles, electrical equipment, etc. These platforms, we believe, will be mutually beneficial since we will be creating locally jobs and value addition, and the components and technology and skills will be fed from India so that in the value chain they are able to create greater number of efficiencies and boost our exports. Our institution building will have to reach out locally so that we are able to create capacities locally in a diverse areas, particularly in the healthcare, agriculture, etc., so that people in those countries are able to benefit from them. In a significant development, we are looking very keenly at taking our India's flagship programs such as Ayushman Bharat, Har Ghar Jal and Digital India technologies to countries that are able to absorb them. We believe that these are low-cost solutions and the developing countries would be immensely benefited and create win-win situations.
So viewers, Mr. Damur Ravi from the Ministry of External Affairs talking about low-cost solutions. India is a provider of low-cost solutions that are reliable and trusted in the developing world. Sachinji, the thing is, he also spoke about local impact, and this you have studied, you have gone to a number of countries and actually looked at our development projects on the ground, and you've noted that there is a shift towards these small development projects, quick impact projects, which can actually touch the local communities at the grassroots. Yeah. And you've mentioned that India is there where no other country is there, in the remotest parts of Africa, in South Asia, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, countries which are struggling to rise up to the higher living standards, but where they are, lacking in infrastructure, lacking in healthcare, lacking in education, or in irrigation for agriculture, for fisheries, these kind of things which actually lift people's lives and livelihoods. India seems to be there, and Mr. Ravi was talking about that thrust, that India should reach out to local communities. So your thought as a development economist, the Indian model of development assistance, it has really touched the lives of ordinary people. I dare say millions of people, over the last 75 years. And how is that playing out, and how do we strategize to reach out to such people?
Absolutely right, Sreeram, because if you look at the development model that we are ourselves committed at home, we are also trying to export that with our development assistance. So Prime Minister's idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat is something which we are exporting through the skills upgradation at that point in those countries, so that they also acquire a skill and they also move in the direction of being Atmanirbhar, self-reliant from that perspective. And that is part of our assistance mechanism all through. So we are providing assistance, we are becoming partners in development largely to end their dependence. And this is something that 2014 India has introduced in a major way, from entitlement based approach to entrepreneurship based approach. So how we encourage entrepreneurship, how we encourage the idea of stakes in the system. So Ayushman Bharat stands for government support for health system, but it is also about owning the system. So how you bring in ownership, when you spend you bring in ownership. So it is about mutual partnership, but it is about that development model where stakes are high, ownerships are high, and we share the ways of doing things rather than just doing things for them. And this is a marked departure from the way ODA has structured itself. And this is Prime Minister's idea, which UK has found extremely interesting, Germany has found interesting, and that's why during Prime Minister's recent visit for the G7 summit, one of the agreements that they revisited, which they had signed just a month ago, is the trilateral partnership.
Yeah.
India-Germany partnership in the third country, India-UK partnership in the third country. So the idea of Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas that we talk about at the domestic level is becoming something evident outside with our partnership, and there we are bringing in new development projects, models, and the ideas, the philosophy of development, which is actually bringing in prosperity at the local level. You are absolutely right that we are picking up projects where stakes are not that high, but benefits are for everyone, which are inclusive in nature. So the small development projects, the micro development projects, which are now all across, are also bringing in SHGs, which are also now increasingly supporting cooperatives. So from that perspective, what are the ways we can actually bring in Indian development model to other countries?
Yeah.
And this is something where we would have to intensively work. And
Absolutely.
we are seeing successes in many areas.
Absolutely. Sachinji, you also have mentioned that there needs to be more clarity on the link between the lines of credit that we do, the grants and the loans, and also how India's trade and investment strategies towards those countries. And sometimes there is probably no material return for India at all, and Prime Minister said many times that we are not looking for any kind of commercial, we are not motivated by commercial goals when we support our fellow developing countries. But sometimes you find as an economist that actually if it's backed up by involvement of our companies and our contractors, then it becomes a virtuous cycle which actually benefits all sides. And in that sense, it's not giving, but we also receive.
Exactly, Sreeram, and that's the reason why I kept the title of my book as it is, The Logic of Sharing, as to when India is requiring these resources, why are we giving it? If you look at, for instance, last year, India received only around $6.49 billion, and India provided $7.88 billion, and this is a trend which I am tracking down for last 20 years. So every time the incoming is lesser than the outgoing, and this is the 7th year of we crossing that.
So become a net giver.
So we have become net giver.
Yeah.
That's point number one. Point number two is in terms of bringing in the private sector. And they, Sreeram, the government from 2014 onwards has conscientiously made this effort of bringing in beyond G2G partnerships. So we are not just confined to government partnerships, we are bringing in non-government actors as well, be that private sector or civil society. I have just finished a paper last year on civil society's engagement outside India, what role they are playing, and OECD has already published it. We are also now trying to see what private sector is doing. If you see, Airtel is one of the biggest net provider in the African region,
Africa.
but they are also one of the large CSR providers in Africa. So they are running schools, our ONGC is running schools. So these things are never documented. They have CSR by legal compulsion in India, but there is no legal compulsion, but they have suo motu taken measures to support, and this is something that we do not realize. We do not know about that. Not many people know about that. So responsible behavior of private sector is something that we are talking about. Some of our private sectors are doing, and I think it's high time to acknowledge them, to encourage them. One point here that Sreeram is important to point out is our lines of credit. In 2015, India strengthened the guidelines for lines of credit, and we have gone for a marked shift in our approach. So we have adopted new framework to marginalize fly-by-night operators, people who are doing corruption or undermining the importance of these instrumentalities with partner countries. They have been left aside. Now only professionals and companies that are listed are now able to enter in the scene, so L&T and others, and not people who just take the lines of credit and do not deliver. So now more stringent rules are there, and better accountability is there. You would find big companies getting into the job and delivering quality services, because before that you found projects running months and years late,
delayed,
not only delayed but low quality delivery, non-accountability. We have changed the paradigm from 2015 onwards.
Viewers, often people contrast China with India. China has a Belt and Road Initiative and mammoth loan projects all over the developing world, and I'd like you to hear from another expert, Professor Ronnie Mullen. She's at the William and Mary College in the United States, and also a fellow at the Center for Policy Research, an important think tank in India. Her thoughts on the difference between the Chinese model of foreign assistance and the Indian model. Let's hear her.
People often ask, how does Indian foreign assistance differ from that of China? And there are two ways in which it really does differ significantly. First is that India has provided grants since shortly after its independence, while China hardly gives grants. Most of China's assistance is in fact in the form of line of credits at commercial or near commercial rates and much shorter repayment plans than Indian assistance. India also gives line of credits, but they also differ from Chinese line of credits in an important way, that is that the cost of borrowing is significantly lower. So if you look at the example of two countries in India's neighborhood, Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, which are both countries that are currently undergoing significant political and economic turmoil, this difference between Indian and Chinese foreign assistance becomes quite clear. In Afghanistan, India gave approximately $2 billion equivalent in assistance over the past 20 years, all of it in the form of grants, while China basically gave no grants. Sri Lanka, when we turn to Sri Lanka, India has offered $3.8 billion equivalent to Sri Lanka in the form of grants, aids, and line of credits. And if you look at, for example, a recent line of credit that was given to Sri Lanka, $500 million to help Sri Lanka cope with its current fuel shortage, that line of credit was extended at an interest rate of below 2% and a 24-year repayment plan. By contrast, when we look at Chinese line of credits to Sri Lanka, they have averaged an interest rate of 3.3% and an 18-year maturity. The second way in which Indian foreign assistance does differ quite a bit from that of China is that India does not engage what is quickly becoming known as empire-building debt equity swaps, while China obviously does. The most famous example, of course, is the Sri Lankan port of Hambantota, where China basically gave Sri Lanka a $1 billion line of credit to build the port, and then when Sri Lanka was unable to pay the money back, they swapped the debt for a 99-year lease on the port and on 15,000 adjacent acres. So these are two really distinct ways in which Indian aid differs from that of China.
Viewers, Professor Ronnie Mullen talking about the chalk and cheese, China and India. You know, they are very different. Sachin, the point she was making also was that the Chinese, there is a clear neo-colonial element to what they are doing in the developing world, but we have a very different approach, and sometimes the propaganda of the Chinese overwhelms the world, thinking that they have become the biggest giver and all that, but the impact of it, there is also a backlash against the Chinese aid and loans and all these things, but clearly we are doing it differently and consciously, and you've written about how there is a decline of the donors from the global north. The rich countries are less and less inclined, they don't have the political will or the resources, so the OECD countries in a way have stepped back. But then the emerging powers, among them there's Brazil and India, which have more equitable approaches, but then the Chinese model has become very rapacious. So you can see that variation in the field now among the ones doing the development cooperation or the so-called aid, and clearly it looks like the future belongs to this more modest but more humane or human-centric, as our Prime Minister calls it, as opposed to the one that is based on resource extraction and on these debt equity swaps that lead to colonization of countries.
Actually, Sreeram, if you look at the broad world trends, and as you might already be aware, we have established a sort of network of research institutions which are working on development finance and development assistance. This is called as NEST, the network of southern think tanks, where China is also there, China is also represented, and we have think tanks from South Africa, Brazil and many other countries, including from Germany. There is a need for us to understand how South-South cooperation or cooperation among developing countries, because many a times the Western scholars describe us as new donors. They describe us as new providers, which is not the case. We are neither provider nor donor. China is also in the same category. We are establishing new norms of partnerships in which we are, as Prime Minister is saying, we are influencing the norm setting within the South, and I'm sure other countries, including China, would also come on board in terms of how they are delivering their development assistance. We cannot undermine the fact that China is one of the biggest economies, and they are coming on board with Prime Minister. The discussions that were there of Mr. Xi Jinping, we had discussed the issues in terms of how India and China together can go in other countries and work together. These discussions probably would be revived by China, and I think India and China can work together for a better world, which I think is important for everyone. And Chinese discussions papers are also looking at these aberrations that you alluded to, and I'm sure India's approach of Brazil and South Africa, which we also called as IPSA. So IPSA is going to set the new norms where all of us are governed by what Sreeram is called as Buenos Aires Plan of Action, BAPA, which just celebrated 40 years in 2019. So it was called BAPA plus 40 with the UN Office on South-South Cooperation. So there are global efforts to set the benchmarks,
and hopefully those will also
they would prevail.
Hopefully they will moderate some of these more rapacious tendencies we are seeing from the Chinese. Sachin, last word on our development cooperations. You already mentioned the triangular ones with other countries, but we also do a lot with multilateral institutions, like there is the India UN Fund for development, and we also have International Solar Alliance established by Prime Minister. Energy is one area where we have done a lot of projects, including renewables. There is the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. A lot of these new initiatives, especially in the Modi era, where we are trying to also provide a vision for sustainable development, to achieve the sustainable development goals of the UN system in partnership with multilateral or in large groups of countries, where India is offering the thought leadership as well as committing finances and also the technical manpower for all the skilling and other things which we are so good at. So your thoughts on how that is going, because that's an important pillar of the way we are approaching this whole development partnerships.
Absolutely right. If you look at Sreeram, since 2014 till 2022, you find a major jump in India's budgetary support to UN agencies. But we haven't gone in any way of asking UN to give certain positions to us, as other countries have done with their donation.
It's a kind of bargaining game.
So exactly. So we haven't entered in that. You might not even heard of India giving sort of money to the UN Office on South-South Cooperation to promote South-South Cooperation. We are not going gaga about it. We are delivering and moving on, supporting the system. So multilateralism requires that nurturing, that support, which is important for it to function. Same thing goes with the idea of India, South Africa, Brazil, the IPSA fund. India is not delivering, South Africa is not delivering, Brazil is not delivering. We have asked UN to deliver our projects, and we have delivered 38 projects. All these 38 projects of around $148 million, not a single contract has gone to any of these three countries. They are with all different countries. So we are not trying to impose us by providing support to multilateral institutions, including the UN. And that's the different approach India has from the other countries.
So it's not an effort to dominate. In fact, we have not wanted to dominate the global south. We don't want to dominate global institutions, but we want a multipolar world order, and where power and economic growth is also equitably distributed, and that's of course the key behind our development partnerships. Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi, thank you so much for joining us in the studio and enlightening the audience about the intricacies. It's a technical subject, but worth following. What India is doing in our immediate neighborhood, in Africa, in Central Asia, in East Asia, and all these parts of the world, Latin America, this is very important, and this actually shows the rise of Indian leadership in the world. The Indian model of development partnership is being increasingly appreciated. We will not brag about it, but the fact is that India is an impactful player in this field, and it is shaping the norms as well as the practices. So keep thinking about India's role as a leader in the changing the environment as far as equitable growth and sharing of resources. It's all about the logic of sharing, as Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi says. So thank you, viewers, for being with me this time. I'll be back again next time with another episode of Indian Diplomacy. Until then, keep watching DD India, India's national television channel.